Buonasera, buonasera a tutte e a tutti coloro che ci stanno seguendo su YouTube. Sono Marco Motta, sono un giornalista e comunicatore scientifico, sono il curatore tra i conduttori del programma Radio 3 Scienza, che è il quotidiano scientifico di Radio 3, e per me è un piacere grande essere qui stasera per presentare il primo degli incontri con gli autori e le autrici finaliste del Premio Cosmos per gli studenti per la divulgazione scientifica. Il Premio Cosmos è organizzato insieme al planetario Pitagoras di Reggio Calabria, la città metropolitana di Reggio Calabria, con la collaborazione del Ministero dell'Istruzione e del Ministero degli Esteri, perché anche oggi, lo ricorderemo tra poco, ci sono alcuni istituti e scuole italiane collegate da paesi esteri. Il Premio Cosmos fa parte del Festival Cosmos che si svolgerà a Reggio Calabria a inizio ottobre, nel quale verranno annunciati i vincitori, le vincitrici del Premio Cosmos e del Premio Cosmos per gli studenti, appunto. Allora, vi ricordo innanzitutto la cinquina finalista del Premio Cosmos Studenti, che sono, i 5 titoli sono questi: Le gioie della scienza di Jim Al-Khalili, pubblicato da Bollati Boringhieri; L'alfabeto della natura, pubblicato da Rizzoli, l'autore è Roberto Battiston; e poi Rosalind Franklin, Ho fotografato il DNA, pubblicato da Morelli, l'autrice è Cadelli, scusate, non ho il nome sotto mano in questo momento. Non siamo soli, invece pubblicato da Mondadori, tradotto dall'inglese Jacob Loeb; e poi, infine, appunto, il libro protagonista, insieme alla sua autrice, di questo nostro primo incontro questa sera, L'intelligenza artificiale, una guida per esseri umani pensanti, pubblicato da Einaudi e scritto da Melanie Mitchell. Allora, saluto anche le studentesse e gli studenti che ci stanno seguendo, che sono molto numerosi. Non riesco a citare tutti gli istituti, ma cito almeno i luoghi. C'è un liceo e gli studenti da Barcellona, dalla Spagna, da Zurigo, in Svizzera, e poi naturalmente dall'Italia, da Roma, da Triggiano Valenzano, da Ischia, da Vibo Valentia, da Polistena, da Pova Marina, da Moncalieri, da Potenza, Reggio Calabria, e poi ancora dall'estero, Madrid, Casablanca, e poi dalla Romania, e tornando ancora in Italia, Reggio Calabria, Locri, Altamura, Arzano, Ortona in provincia di Chieti, Sassari e Catanzaro. A tutti loro va il nostro saluto e il benvenuti e benvenute a questo incontro. Oltre naturalmente a portare i saluti del presidente del comitato scientifico organizzatore di questo premio, Gianfranco Bertone, adesso lascio la parola invece a Filippo Quartuccio, che è il consigliere delegato alla cultura della città metropolitana di Reggio Calabria, che ci parla in collegamento da Palazzo Alvaro, la sede istituzionale proprio della città metropolitana. Prego, Filippo Quartuccio.
Grazie, buonasera a tutte e a tutti, buonasera a chi ci ascolta, a chi ci sta guardando, buonasera a tutti voi un po' più addetti ai lavori. Ecco, saluto davvero con grande calore i ragazzi che ci stanno seguendo degli istituti che hai menzionato tu poco fa. Noi siamo orgogliosi di arrivare alla quarta edizione del Premio Cosmos, ne parlavamo proprio in questi giorni con il sindaco facente funzioni della città metropolitana di Reggio Calabria, il dottor Carmelo Versace, che vi saluta calorosamente e vi ringrazia per il vostro impegno quotidiano teso alla valorizzazione della cultura scientifica in ogni sua accezione possibile. E quindi porto anche i saluti di Carmelo Versace, ma porto i saluti di una comunità. Porto i saluti di tutta la comunità metropolitana di Reggio Calabria, che si è affacciata al Premio Cosmos grazie all'intuizione ormai 4 anni fa del professor Gianfranco Bertone, per questa lodevole e nobile iniziativa, sposata subito dalla città metropolitana di Reggio Calabria, che ha inteso sostenerla anche economicamente. Perché ha inteso sostenere questa iniziativa la città metropolitana di Reggio Calabria? Perché in tutti questi anni abbiamo profuso un impegno nei confronti della cultura scientifica davvero incisivo. oserei dire, perché ci siamo accorti che la cultura scientifica può fare la differenza per i nostri ragazzi, che la cultura scientifica può fare la differenza per le nostre comunità e anche per le famiglie dei ragazzi che si approcciano a questo mondo, mi sia consentito dire. Abbiamo sperimentato nel corso di questi anni eccellenti esperienze di ragazzi e di ragazze, di studenti e di studentesse che hanno ottenuto dei risultati davvero lodevoli sul piano nazionale e internazionale e nel campo soprattutto delle Olimpiadi di astronomia, delle Olimpiadi di matematica, insomma di tutte queste discipline scientifiche per le quali si sono distinti i ragazzi prevalentemente del nostro territorio. E il Premio Cosmos va esattamente in questa direzione. Vogliamo con il Premio Cosmos in un certo senso coronare una sorta di impegno annuale che si ripete sempre per la nostra comunità e lo facciamo davvero con grande entusiasmo perché siamo consapevoli del ritorno assolutamente importante che ha questo tipo di iniziativa per la nostra comunità, ma per i ragazzi in generale ma soprattutto anche per le istituzioni coinvolte, perché è qualificante per tutti e per questo volevo ringraziare per la loro sempre concreta collaborazione il Ministero degli Affari Esteri, il Ministero dell'Istruzione e del Merito, che non hanno mai fatto mancare il loro sostegno. Un ringraziamento particolare devo necessariamente rivolgerlo al professore Bertone, perché con grande tenacia e con grande determinazione ha creduto dall'inizio a questa forte collaborazione con la città metropolitana. Ecco, la cultura scientifica per noi è una stella polare, è un po' il cuore pulsante, un piccolo cuore pulsante della nostra attività quotidiana, della nostra attività politica e amministrativa, un'attività che viene svolta in collaborazione con gli uffici. C'è qui la dottoressa Parisi accanto a me che se ne occupa assieme ai suoi colleghi. Ecco, mi piace pensare che attraverso questa iniziativa ci siamo candidati nel panorama nazionale a rappresentare un punto di riferimento per la cultura scientifica del Mezzogiorno d'Italia. Ho lanciato questa provocazione diversi anni fa, l'ho ripresa costantemente ogni anno, la riprendo anche oggi con piacere, perché dobbiamo assolutamente comunicare bene tutto quello che facciamo e lo dobbiamo comunicare soprattutto a tutte quelle persone che non credono che da Reggio Calabria si possano proporre delle iniziative di spessore che proiettano l'intera comunità metropolitana in una dimensione, in un panorama davvero nazionale e internazionale. E il Premio Cosmos e il Festival Cosmos esattamente hanno questa funzione. Ecco, io non la faccio lunga, vi dico grazie davvero per tutto quello che fate, per il vostro apporto scientifico e tecnico, per la vostra vicinanza e per il vostro sostegno e vi invito chiaramente ad essere presenti a Reggio Calabria non appena possibile. Buon lavoro.
Bene, grazie davvero a Filippo Quarratuccio per questo messaggio di benvenuto e anche per aver sottolineato il significato appunto per il territorio, per la cultura naturalmente scientifica, ma la cultura diciamo nel suo più ampio senso di questo premio e del Festival Cosmos. Now I'll switch to English to say hello and introduce our two special guests of this evening, starting from Melanie Mitchell. Good evening.
Good evening.
And thank you for being with us. Good afternoon also to Roberto Trotta.
Hello, great to be here.
Melanie Mitchell is Davis Professor of Complexity at the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico, in the United States, where she's speaking from right now. For those among the students who don't know or ever heard about this center, let me tell you that it's a kind of modern Athens or kind of modern Vienna, like it was in the past century, 1 century ago. A place where scientists, philosophers, artists, even writers meet each other and share their visions and make a confrontation about very fundamental issues. consider that in the next few months, a couple of books will be published in Italian by the great writer Cormac McCarthy, who is one of the best novelists in the United States right now. And they were born in that place in some way, in the daily confrontation with the other people in Santa Fe Institute. Obviously, Melanie Mitchell will be talking this evening about her book. Was published, as we told before, by Einaudi in Italian. Let me say something also about Roberto Trotta, who is he has been a professor of astrostatistics at Imperial College in London. And now he's on leave of absence, and because he's working and is talking to us from Trieste, where he's head of a group in theoretical and scientific data science at the International School for Advanced Studies. Let me add that Trieste and Sissa in some way are also a kind of modern Athens, because it's a kind of a place where people from all over the world come to study, to make science at the highest level, make research at the highest level. Let me mention also that the fact that, which is particularly important for our discussion of this evening, that Roberto is also co-teaching with Elisabetta Tola, who is a colleague of mine at Radio 3, a course on journalism and AI at the Master in Science Communication at the International School for Advanced Studies in Sissa. So he's particularly interested, I guess, in talking about this aspect also with Melanie. I just want to add one thing before leaving the floor to the dialogue among Melanie and Roberta, and I just would say that if you guys, students who are listening, looking at us, have already read the book, you'll see that Melanie starts by telling her story of studying AI, starting from her degree in mathematics, and looking for the chance to study with a man, Douglas Hofstadter, who has written a really an important book. And beyond and beside reading, of course, the book by Melanie, I would recommend to read maybe during the summer, because it's a challenging book, let's say. So you need time to try and read it, which is called, the title is Gödel, Escher and Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid. In italiano, Gödel, Escher and Bach, quindi questi tre grandi personaggi, un'eterna ghirlanda brillante. A book which was published around 40 years ago, but it's still full of all the questions that we are confronting today. Talking about, for example, ChatGPT. I guess that many of the students who are listening and watching this evening have tried to interact with ChatGPT in the last few months, and maybe you have some questions came to your minds also in these months. So I don't want to steal any more time, so I leave the floor to Roberta and Melanie for their dialogue, and I really listen with great curiosity to their speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco, and hello everybody from myself as well. It's a great pleasure to be here. Great pleasure to be opening this series of events with the Premio Cosmos, which will of course culminate in October in Reggio Calabria, and I look forward to being there for the very final phase. But tonight we have the great pleasure, and it's a great honor for me to be hosting together with Marco Melanie Mitchell, the author of Intelligenza artificiale, una guida per umani pensanti, and it's a wonderful book. Many of you will have read it already. I'm sure you will have learned a great deal about a very important, very timely topic for our times, artificial intelligence. And Melanie, you start off your book by saying this is not an overview of AI landscape, and indeed it is quite technical, but very, very understandable everywhere. So, but it does end up actually giving quite a lot of really big picture ideas. So, and in my opinion, the strength of the book is exactly that you are able to both take your readers through fairly technical aspects of AI, machine learning that are often overlooked, but also at the same time not shying away from the big questions. And I want to start from the beginning. I want to start from where the book starts, and that this is very interesting encounter you relate firsthand in 2014 when you and Douglas Hofstadter, that Marco was mentioning earlier, your former PhD advisor and sort of towering inspiration figure, one could say, you visited Google headquarters and had a meeting about what was then, I guess, fairly new technology, or well, starting really taking the shape that we recognize today, almost 10 years later. And Doug, was scared, was really frightened in that meeting. And I wanted to ask you, can you tell us why was he scared? What was he scared about? And was he right to be scared?
Yeah, so what he was scared about is actually somewhat different from what most people are scared about. Most people today, they're scared about several different things. They're scared about AI taking over jobs, about it having bias, racial, gender, other biases. They're scared about it taking control of things, taking over from humans. But Hofstadter was actually really scared about what AI meant for what it means to be human. And you can see from the title of his famous book, Gödel, Escher, Bach. Gödel was a famous mathematician. Escher was a famous artist. Bach, of course, composer, musician. And to Hofstadter, those kinds of things, mathematics, art, music, and other literature, other extremely human pursuits, were being taken over in some sense by AI systems. AI systems were able to compose music, to generate art, to generate language, to do mathematics. And Hofstadter was afraid that these systems would sort of minimize our humanity, minimize the profundity of what humans could do, and show that it actually could be done by what he called a bag of tricks, namely the kinds of systems we're now seeing in AI with, say, ChatGPT. And that was really his terror. And I've talked to him, of course, over the years, and his terror has only increased.
And so he was scared that AI, in a sense, was not that AI would be too complicated, but in the sense that it would be too simple, and that relatively simple systems would come to be as intelligent as we are, and therefore sort of demonstrate that we are not as smart or as complex as we think we are, perhaps. Has that come to pass?
I don't think it has yet come to pass, and I don't think it will soon, but there's a lot of disagreement, even among AI researchers, over what our current state of AI actually means for thinking about intelligence. The history of AI has shown again and again that our own intuitions about our intelligence are very flawed. Back in 1960s, people working in AI thought that it would be very easy to capture things like human vision, to look out at the world and describe what we see. And that turned out to be much more difficult than anyone imagined. People also thought that, for instance, back in the 1970s and 1980s, that getting a computer program to play chess at a grandmaster level would require all of sort of human general intelligence. And as we saw in the 1990s, we got AI systems like Deep Blue that were able to defeat the world chess champions, and now it's just assumed that chess programs, that humans will never surpass today's computer chess programs. So as I said in the book, one of the lessons of AI is that things that seem really easy for us, like looking out at the world, describing what we see, turn out to be hard for machines, whereas doing things like playing chess, playing Go, translating between languages, and so on, turn out to be easier than we thought. So our intuitions about what intelligence is and what's sort of the heart of human intelligence are being challenged by advances in AI.
And perhaps the advancements and the solutions come from unexpected directions sometimes. We'll come back to that in a minute. But you mentioned just now, and also, of course, in the book, we talk about this in quite some detail, general artificial intelligence. And since I want to go a little bit more into the details later on, maybe it's useful to remind our audience about the difference between strong AI, weak AI. What are we talking about when we say strong AI or general artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so this is actually a point of debate even today, what that means. So the idea, going back in history of AI, for a long time, AI systems could only do specific tasks. They could play chess, they could do machine translation, they could you could use your phone to translate speech to text, and those systems weren't able to do anything else. AlphaGo, which recently was able to defeat the world's most advanced human Go players, couldn't play checkers. It couldn't play chess without being completely retrained. So the idea that we could have a system that could do sort of the span of general tasks that humans can do has been sort of at the heart of the main goals of AI, and that's been called human level AI or AGI, artificial general intelligence. But one of the problems is we don't really have a set of criteria which says, okay, now we've arrived at artificial general intelligence. So ChatGPT and other of these so-called generative AI systems actually have some generality to them. They can talk to us if we ask them to solve mathematical problems. Sometimes they can do that. They can plan out, like they can plan your party. They can do all kinds of different things. So some people are saying we're seeing sort of the beginnings of AGI, but actually these systems are still quite limited in what they can do. And it's not clear that while we see some sort of hints of more general intelligence, that's actually going to result in the future in anything like human intelligence. We've seen again and again sort of the predictions of that from AI experts that end up failing because we didn't really understand our own intelligence. So I think right now we're at a stage of great uncertainty in the field of AI, which is, exciting and also scary at the same time.
Absolutely. But so many of us have become aware of those systems like ChatGPT and so on only relatively recently. But of course, they didn't explode out of nowhere. Maybe they came into public consciousness now all of a sudden in many ways. But they have a long and checkered history in a certain sense. How did we get here? Why is this, generative AI all of a sudden all over the world? Why is business, everybody is trying to use these systems, exploit these systems, and enhance the systems? How did we get here?
So this history of generative AI, of course, is very long, as you say, that we had systems that could generate language 60 years ago. They just weren't very good at it. They just weren't very convincing. If you interacted with them for any amount of time, you would immediately see that they're very robotic. They're clearly computers. But more recently, due to advances in these what are called deep neural networks, very large, complex systems that are roughly based on how the brain works, and the amount of data that's available for them because of the advent of the World Wide Web, where we all put data, our language and our images and our videos and our voices, and we put everything online, and lots of books are digitized, and there's just so much data that these systems have now been able to advance to the point that they now seem actually to be able to converse in a very human-like way. So the other aspect is that companies like OpenAI, which is the company behind ChatGPT, put it out there for free for anyone to use, for better or worse, right? So anybody can play with these systems now, and people have been doing all kinds of different things with these systems. So I think that they've come into the public consciousness much more than anything before. But I'll also just add one thing, is that we've interacted with AI systems for a long time. We all use AI, for instance, as I said, in like speech recognition. When you dictate a text, instead of typing it out, you say it to your phone. But a system that converses with us in language, in natural language, seems to humans to be more intelligent, just because of that interface. The fact that it's talking to us in our own language and seems to be able to respond appropriately is something that we humans can respond to in very often emotional ways. You've seen a lot of people getting kind of emotionally involved with these chat bots. And that's really more something about humans than about the state of AI, that we are so programmed in some sense by evolution and our social environment to respond to language. So that's, I think, what's really speaking to people, is the fact that these things are using language. So that is what's making people speculate about whether these systems might be conscious or sentient or any of these other things.
And we've seen, highly publicized cases. Google engineer who claimed that their model had exhibited consciousness, got fired, etc. Maybe examples of what you just said, projections in Jungian speak, if we wanted to take a psychological, psychotherapeutical turn. So you said that these AI systems, then they say a lot about us, the way we anthropomorphize them, the way we interact with them, the way we project onto them things that perhaps are not inside the box, are not inside the machine. Do you think that the road to human level intelligence, if we ever get there, in the book you're quite skeptical, certainly in terms of super intelligence, but should we ever get there, do you think an understanding of what human intelligence is and how that comes about is a prerequisite, or could it be that we could come up with good enough mimicry, indistinguishable from the real thing, and therefore at some point even a debate of what actually is human intelligence, what actually is human consciousness, will just die out because we don't know, but we don't care because we can reproduce it in a box and nobody actually knows. What do you think?
Yeah, that is the question. I mean, that is the question that everybody in the AI field is struggling with. First of all, can these systems become intelligent or understand in some human-like way without interacting with the world? These systems are trained on language. They don't pick up objects. They don't play with things in real life. They don't interact with in the way that we do with the physical and social world. And nobody knows whether language itself is sufficient to contain all of the knowledge and all of the sort of information about how the world works for these systems to learn it. A lot of people say absolutely not. A lot of people say, yeah, seems like it probably is. So I think that that's totally unknown right now. And that's going to be the question that really actually matters in the future, because it goes to whether we can trust these systems. companies like Microsoft and Google are now putting these chatbots into their search engines. So when you search for things, you can get a summary from a chatbot telling you the information you need rather than having to go through specific websites. But it turns out they're not reliable. They actually will say things that are not true. They will cite websites to support their claims where the website doesn't actually support what they say. And they make things up all the time. And possibly that's because they don't have this grounding in the real world that we have. And they also don't have the desire to be truthful that I think most humans have. They don't have any desires at all. And a lot of people have said until they actually can be made to care about the world, to care about something like truthfulness versus falsity, we'll never be able to solve these problems.
That's really interesting. So machines that care might be the solution, but that could also be, even more terrifying in a sense. What if they care about things that, we don't want, right?
Exactly.
That's the big
Exactly.
danger. And going back all the way to Alan Turing, one of the founding fathers, one could say, of artificial intelligence, already in the 50s, he introduced this idea of machines that can learn from experience, and he explicitly made this a comparison with the child's brain, tabula rasa, a blank slate of a brain that would then learn by a trial and error course. But Turing and all the tradition that followed were very disincarnated, disembodied in a sense. This blank slate was an intellectual playground, was a metaphor, was a concept that was completely separated from the actual environment. So do you think that would it be wise for us to try and overcome that limit and say, well, if we want to make these machines care about the kind of feelings and values and truthfulness that we care about, we need to make them more like us and therefore subject them to a more embodied experience of the world? Or would that just up the ante and just make things even more dangerous? Because once you get there, then there's really nothing between us and them.
Yeah, a very complicated question. And, a lot of people say we really should not make these systems like us. We already have people. People are good at certain things. Machines are good at other things, and we should have the machines complement us and do the things that we are not good at, just like they always have. Like a calculator is very good at multiplying numbers, whereas humans are not. So we use calculators. But it really depends on what you want the machines to do. So, one example would be self-driving cars. Now, people have been talking about self-driving cars for decades, and often have been saying that, any minute you won't have to drive anymore. Your self-driving car will be able to do everything. But that hasn't happened. And one of the reasons that it's so hard to get trustworthy self-driving cars is because machines don't think like us. The machines underlying the self-driving cars, the vision systems, the decision-making systems, don't see the world in the way that we do. They perceive things as obstacles in the road that humans wouldn't perceive it. They often mistake pedestrians for things, then they can make big errors and even cause fatal accidents. And so if we really want fully autonomous self-driving cars, we really will have to make them think more like humans because they're interacting with humans in the world. So I think it really depends on whether you want these systems to act autonomously in the real world without a human in the loop, or whether we always want to have a human in the loop to do the things that humans are good at. It's very hard to say because, we have to be very careful about granting autonomy to things that don't think like us and that we don't understand. But if we make them think like us, that introduces new dangers. So I find this a very complicated and difficult question to grapple with.
Absolutely. You said, we need to be careful what we ask for and really want to do the things. But Who decides?
Say that again.
Who decides what those machines ought to be able to do? Are self-driving cars a good application of AI, or is screening systems based on AI gather data, or credit scoring, or whatever you want to call it, or even predictive policing, the idea that you can predict when and who potentially will be involved in a crime next? Who decides where and how those systems are deployed?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big problem. Right now, who decides? Well, whoever is making these systems and who's ever using them. So right now, for things like, as you say, it's predictive policing, or using facial recognition software in policing, big companies sell their products to police departments or law enforcement, and there's really very little oversight. There's very little regulation. And it's a situation where technology is going much faster than it's progressing much faster than sort of regulation and law enforcement can keep up. And there's all kinds of patchwork of regulation in different countries. In Europe, there's much more strong protection for privacy and data, control of data than there is, for instance, here in the United States. But even so, we don't really yet have enforcement. And it's very hard to enforce these regulations. So I know that in Italy there was recently a ban of ChatGPT, but of course that's going to be hard to enforce, and also hard to sort of write out what regulations these systems should follow. So I think it's a big mess right now, and this question of who should decide is really going to be up to all of us, and in fact, our leaders who don't understand the technology very well, to figure out how they should regulate these systems. And I think it's analogous in many ways to advances in biology and genetics, and the ability of our ability to sort of edit and genes and control, build synthetic organisms and so on, and do cloning. And that technology is also having a lot of progress that governments can't really keep up with. So these systems, I believe they have to be regulated at the level of governments, but it's, as we see in countries like Italy, like China, and other places that are trying to regulate them, it's hard to do.
So governments are lagging behind. Academics are a little bit frozen out because all of this development happens in big companies who have the firepower, the money, and the willingness to go ahead regardless. Thinking about our public, the students, the young people who are listening here, those are the people, the next generation, who will have to live with the consequences of whatever we decide or not decide. What should a good digital citizen of today, digital native preparing for the world of tomorrow, what should they know and what should they do to prepare?
Yeah. So I think they should be literate in these technologies. They should know how these technologies work. They should be able to think critically about what is sort of AI overstatements or hype surrounding claims about AI versus real truthful assessments of where we are. And they should really think broadly, not just about sort of the technology itself, like developing neural networks and language models and that, but also the societal impacts. When I was a student, things were very sort of siloed. You know, we studied computer science, we studied mathematics, but no one mentioned like, oh, as a computer scientist, you should be thinking about regulation of computational systems, or you should be thinking about bias or other things of a social nature. But now that we have these systems, it's absolutely imperative that those boundaries between disciplines get broken down, and that people in computer science or mathematics or any of these fields think about social issues, and also people who are in the social sciences or humanities have to educate themselves about the technologies. You know, AI used to be as kind of a sub-discipline of computer science, but now I think it's really a sub-discipline of everything. And it's going to be as essential as to understand as, you know, any kind of computational technology that's coming around. So, you know, students have to be educated about this kind of thing and have to learn to think critically.
Thank you. Marco, I have a ton of other questions for Melanie, but I want to leave space to the students as well. How are we doing for time?
Sorry, here we are. We have already a bunch of questions from our students, but I think that you can take another 5 to 10 minutes if you want to go on with this wonderful and amazing conversation with Melanie.
Well, no, if you let me go on, I will monopolize Melanie, and that's not my intention, as lovely as it is. But I will take the privilege of the chair and ask Melanie a couple more things, just because I'm curious. I'm curious to know, what are you working on at the moment, Melanie? And also, looking ahead, what is, in your opinion, the next big thing about AI that people are not talking about right now, that you think people should be talking about or thinking about?
Yeah, so I'm working on some things that I actually talked about in the book about how to get machines to make analogies. And this is something that I think is some very key to human cognition, being able to make an analogy between two situations, to be able to retrieve some situation from memory that will help you act in a new situation, and to be able to abstract your concepts. And this is something that, even with our, you know, the amazing properties of current AI systems, it's still something that machines can't do very well. So I think this kind of thing, trying to get machines to sort of think, this would be thinking more like humans, I guess, is something very much lacking in today's systems, and makes them still quite unreliable and unable to take what they have learned and transfer it to some new situation. So that's really the main interest of my research, but I'm as interested in like human cognition as I am in machine cognition. And so I want to understand how people do this as well. So I study both humans and machines and try to understand sort of the differences and what's sort of lacking in machine intelligence that humans have.
Mm-hmm. And what's the next big thing, do you think, that's coming around the exponential road, as it were?
Yeah. So, you know, we've seen things like ChatGPT, which can deal with language. But the next thing is to what people call multimodal systems. That is, they have modality of language, but also, say, a vision, so that they can take a picture and answer questions about it, can take a video or a movie and reason about it, sort of bringing together language and visual information. And that's already something that OpenAI and other companies have done to some extent. They haven't released it to the public yet, because I don't think it really works as well as they want it to, but we'll be seeing that more of that soon.
So we're going to enter soon in a world where all of these capabilities get merged together, and who knows, like primordial broth with the spark of thunder perhaps gives a rise to life. Maybe that's going to be sort of a new digital life, or not life, but consciousness perhaps of sorts. We shall see.
I'm skeptical, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are 15 weeks between GPT-3 and GPT-4, so these things are coming thick and fast, and it won't be a long wait. Thank you, Melanie. This is fascinating. Like I said, I could go on and on and on, but I will relinquish you to the questions from the students. Marco.
Yes, thank you, Roberto, and thank you, Melanie, really, for this amazing conversation full of really challenging ideas and stimulus for reflection. So there are a lot of greetings from the students from everywhere, from Potenza, from Bova Marina near Reggio Calabria, and from Barcelona. So greetings to everyone, and thank you for just writing. And I would like to try to put some of the many questions that have arrived, try to group them out if possible. Well, first of all, I have to mention Melanie, the message from De Buzzati, who said, I read Melanie's book. Well, actually listen to the audio book. It's very good. And really elucidates the capability of AI and has very contemporary info. So a message of appreciation. Then there is a question from actually from 3 or 4 students. They are focusing on creativity. There is Pietro Simone from Liceo Classico Cagnazzi di Altamura, Caterina Ambrogio from Liceo Scientifico Alessandro Volta e Reggio Calabria, and also Alessia Strani from Liceo Scientifico Alessandro Volta di Reggio Calabria, who are asking if from one side, how could AI enhance human creativity, and also if the creativity from artificial intelligence will ever take the place of the role of the human artist. Melanie.
Yeah, so I think in terms of AI enhancing creativity, this is something that generative AI is really making a big impact. We see a lot of artists who are using generative AI image generation systems to in a kind of human machine team where the human prompts the machine generates something, the human then reformulates their prompt, the machine generates something. It's kind of an evolutionary partnership, and the machine and human together can create something that neither could have done alone. So I think that's a really interesting new area of creativity. And there's been some really stunning artwork that's come out of that. Also with literature, the humans are using machines to generate ideas, to generate metaphors, new ways of kind of stating things. But I do not think that machines are going to, at least no time soon, replace humans in terms of as creative actors. Because while they can generate lots and lots of artwork or music or literature or anything like that very quickly, I don't think that they're able to judge it. They don't know that one piece that they generate is better than another. They don't know why one would be better than another. And that's something that's very difficult to mechanize, to automate. So I do think that that's a huge part of creativity. There's sort of the generative part, but there's also the judgment part, the part that says, this is what I want. This is something that's beautiful. This is something that's creative. And that's something that humans are still far exceed machines in being able to do. So that, and I think that's going to turn out to be a very hard thing to automate.
Okay, thank you for the answer, Melanie. A lot of a river of questions actually are arriving right now, so I try to select some of them, starting from the one coming from Vincenzo Mancusi from Liceo Classico Potenza in Potenza. Is there a risk for the security or privacy because AI, but also simple online archive, so is written, owns lots of personal information? You mentioned before the fact that the Italian privacy authority decided to stop the activity of the access to ChatGPT in Italy. What do you think about this risks for privacy?
Yeah, there's a lot of risk, I think. These systems have been trained on a good portion of everything that's been posted online. And a lot of personal information is posted online. And often without the relevant person's consent. It's not just me posting stuff about me, it's me posting stuff about other people, and these systems are being trained on it. And so it's risky because humans don't yet know how to control the outputs of these systems to make them respect, privacy laws or privacy regulations. There's an attempt to do that. Big companies that make these systems, try to train them not to spout toxic language or biased language or to reveal private information. But we don't know how to control them. And, people have seen that there's all kinds of ways that we can manipulate the systems into actually generating kinds of things that the companies don't want them to. The other question, that one of the laws in the European regulations is the right to be forgotten. The fact that if there's something about you that's online, that it should be able to be removed if you want it to be. That's absolutely impossible with these language models because they're so complicated, and the way that they process information is so complex that there's no way to say, like, if there's something about me that I request to OpenAI that it take out of this language model, they can't do it. There's no method for that. So that's something that I think is the companies are going to be grappling with. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits. We've already seen that. And the other danger is, the propensity of these systems to make things up. We've already seen that they've made up very damaging information about people. There's a famous case now of an Australian mayor that ChatGPT generated a paragraph about him and accused him of being part of a bribery scandal. And he's actually suing OpenAI. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting lawsuits, and it's not at all clear how this is all going to pan out, and whether the regulations that are in place now in, say, Europe and some other countries are going to be enforceable, or whether they're going to have to completely shut down all access to these systems, which it seems crazy to me, and is actually, I think, going to cause more problems than some of the regulations do.
Okay, very interesting. There's a question from Maria Pia Petrosino from Potenza. She asked, I was curious to know if in what way do you think our interpersonal relationship will be affected? Do you think this AI will make us even more lonely? Asks Maria.
Yeah, I think that's one of the fears. It's interesting because as I mentioned, people tend to have emotional responses to text generated by these systems. This is not something new. This has happened throughout the history of chatbots, that people have projected sort of understanding and emotion onto what these systems generate. There was a company that was using chatbots to allow people to kind of have quote unquote romantic relationships with their chatbot. And the chatbots started becoming more and more inappropriate. And so the company cut off everything, and people were just horrified and devastated that their conversation partner, who they had become emotionally attached to, was now gone. So I do think there is this danger. There's also a danger that I think people are pushing on using machines now in things like education. Like, oh, now you can have your personal AI tutor who will teach you things, and that will replace your teacher, your human teacher. But what we saw, for instance, during the COVID pandemic, is when everybody went online for education, that actually the personal connection between humans is absolutely essential for successful education. The in-person connection between a teacher and students is what makes education work. And so when everything went online, it really didn't work very well at all. So I don't know, I think there is the danger that AI will make people more lonely in a way, because, people will be trying to substitute AI for human connection, and it won't really work.
Okay, thank you so much. There's another interesting question. This time is Giada Napasi writing. She wonders how in China AI is developing, because she knows, she has read that they're really investing a lot of money with the aim to create AI society. And so she's wondering how long will it take before a kind of society with AI at the center in China may take place? I think this is an interesting question, because actually we are seeing a lot, and we are following and discussing on what's happening about what, for example, ChatGPT displays is able to do, and we are discussing at various levels, but we don't exactly know or are allowed to follow what's happening in China from the point of view also of the data with which they are training their artificial intelligence, since there's a kind of mass surveillance systems. So how do we cope with this, what's going to happen in the near future in China?
Well, I think, as you said, mass surveillance is kind of the goal of the Chinese government with AI. A big part of Chinese society is control of social interactions and this social life in China, and control of information. So it kind of cuts both ways, because on the one hand, the AI can be used by a government to surveil citizens. That's already happening, I think, in China, and probably in other countries as well. But on the other hand, a system like ChatGPT, if people use it, it can generate text and information that the government might not like, that the government doesn't want its citizens to see. So the Chinese have perhaps the most stringent regulations right now on generative AI. They have a list of regulations that they put into effect recently, that basically all generative AI systems, if these regulations were actually enforced, all generative AI systems would be banned. And I think the government would have to train its own, as it's probably doing, and try and control it. in some much more stringent way than we see with, say, ChatGPT. But the problem is that that's actually impossible. To get us, there's a trade-off between, ability, intelligence, and control. You can't have a system that's as capable as ChatGPT if it's strictly controlled in what it can output. And I think we already see that with, ChatGPT versus previous less controlled systems. Those less controlled systems, in some sense, had more interesting abilities, and part of the limitations have been on the strict controls that even OpenAI has put. So I think there's going to be an interesting trade-off between getting systems that are very sort of intelligent in some way, and systems that are controlled. And it's very, like with people, systems that have a sufficient degree of intelligence really can't be controlled in any easy way.
Okay, before putting another couple of questions from the students, I would like to ask you another thing, and I ask if Roberto would like to comment on that also, because you mentioned before the fact that the ChatGPT or large language models may really enhance the production at an industrial level of fake news in some way. And the question is, how do we as a society, and also young people in particular that are now growing up in a new environment from the point of view of the information, the journalism world, could try to orientate themselves to understand what is really rooted in a good production of news production, and what is fake in some way. And on this side, I would like to Roberto, if you want to comment on this also, considering the course that you co-teaching at the CISA. Please, Melanie, and then Roberto.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need AI to create misinformation or disinformation, as we've seen. Humans can do that pretty well, but AI can certainly make it more efficient, and they can generate both language and fake images and fake videos, and now they can imitate people's voices, all of that. So it's going to be almost impossible to know, if you have a given sort of posting online or an image that you see online, to know without doing some really deep investigation whether it's fake or not. So I think there has to be some kind of regulation, some kind of laws that force companies that make these products to have some way to identify their products, as the generation of their products as generated by a machine. Enforcing that's going to be hard, but it's absolutely essential, because there's no good way to detect after the fact that something is real or fake. And that's not true. That's true with AI, and it's also, it's true also now with Photoshop and other tools that people can use to make disinformation. But it's going to just be much bigger problem with these AI systems. And I'll be interested to hear what Roberto has to say too.
Yes, I agree. I think that the technology, though, can help only so much, because it's an arms race. You put a watermark in, you put some way of detecting the fake into the system. Somebody else comes up with another way of working around it. So definitely there has to be a component like that. But equally, I think on the other side, it's important to highlight even more the issue of trust and trustworthy news outlets, trustworthy journalists, and outlets and journalists who still put in the work and actually verify sources, do their utmost to actually be on the ground and not just take news from Twitter and, and reprinting them and put them on their sites. And of course, it's all interconnected, because that kind of journalism is also under threat because of it's expensive and it's done by humans, and it's much cheaper to do it by machine. But I think people like Marco and Elisabetta and people who know how to do proper journalism and are affiliated with trustworthy news outlets that people can actually trust for impartial, objective, and verified reporting. This will be absolutely central in keeping democracy, from falling apart.
Okay, there are still a couple of questions that I would like to pick up, and for you, Melanie, one is about, actually there are a bunch of questions that focus on the risks of that human work may be really taken over by AI. So the general question is, how do you imagine that really the relationship between human work and AI work may evolve from one side? And then there's a kind of a technical question from Esther Bini from Switzerland, Liceo Vermigli. What are your ideas on how to improve machine learning so that neural networks are more efficient or can be trained with less data?
Okay, so the first question was about jobs. Will AI take over jobs? And this question has come up in the past with technologies over and over again, and it's always been the case that it's very hard to predict. Technology takes over some jobs, but creates new jobs that we didn't even know we needed. So I think the same thing will happen with AI, is that kind of it will take over some jobs, already has to some extent, but it will create new jobs. We have, just as an example, we have this new job as AI ethicist, somebody who works for a company and helps the company think about ethical practices for AI. That's something that never existed before, and now is a very important part of AI. AI research and kind of commercial product development. So all those people who got degrees in philosophy and never thought they would get a good paying job, now there are jobs like that. So that's just one example of many. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think people's jobs will change. We might become more, for instance, a journalist might be using generative AI, but will still have to be in the loop to make sure that what the generative AI outputs is true and trustworthy. But maybe their job will shift. And that's happened throughout the history of technology. So I don't think there will be a huge takeover of jobs where AI will replace humans in some very large scale way. We haven't seen that in the past, and I don't think we'll see it anytime soon, but I think our jobs will change. As for how to make AI systems more efficient and less reliant on huge amounts of data, I think that there we can take some hints from human intelligence. Humans learn by not just being passively fed huge amounts of language or images, but we're very active. We seek out things to learn from. We seek out learning opportunities. Even infants from birth are very active learners and are not passive. And I think the notion of active learning, which is something that's been studied quite a bit in cognitive science, will allow machines to learn in a much more efficient way. There's also, I think, Roberto, in an earlier question, mentioned this idea of the blank slate, this idea that, we train a machine to learn everything that it's going to learn, we don't build anything in. But of course, humans have a lot of built-in knowledge that about the world, just very basic things that we don't even talk about, like the world consists of objects or other agents that have goals. And machines don't even know that much to begin with. And it takes a long time for them to learn such a thing, a lot of data. So there are some things that I think could be innately given to machines that would help them learn in a much more efficient way about the world.
Okay, Melanie, now there's the hard question, I would call it, because there's Michele Riccieri from, let me see, is writing from the Liceo Classico in Potenza, who says, in your book, you kind of rule out the consciousness question because you consider it scientifically insidious. So could you try to go deep on this issue, explaining Michele as the concept, this point more in detail?
Yeah, so consciousness is a notion that's been argued about by philosophers for millennia, and they still haven't come to any consensus on what it means and how to think about it. There's different notions of consciousness. One is sort of awareness, where the world is different for me when I'm awake than from when I'm asleep, or from when I'm if I'm like given anesthesia and put in something like a coma. It's very, I have this notion of awareness. Then there's the notion of what people have called qualia, which means sort of what it's like to say, see the color red, what it feels like inside. And other notions of consciousness. There's just many, many different meanings of that word. And I don't think anyone knows enough about some of the harder aspects of that to really say whether a machine is or is not conscious. It's not even a well-formed question. So there are some theories of consciousness, but no one really agrees on which ones have merit. And so in the book, I tried to sidestep it all and not to really talk about consciousness, because I just feel like it's such a sort of a fuzzy, ill-defined area. And it's also, it's tied up with the notion of life. Could you have something that's not alive be conscious? And what would that mean? And, something that doesn't have a notion of self. And I don't think any of these AI systems that we have now have anything like that. So I think that talk about consciousness really needs more clarity around what we really mean by that, and what we mean in terms of humans and non-human animals. We don't even agree. People don't even agree on whether certain animals have consciousness and so on. So it's a really difficult philosophical and not very scientific question right now.
Yes, indeed. I think we have given space to more or less all the questions. I just would like, before closing this conversation, to ask you to add something on the ethical level, because you said before that, for example, new jobs like the AI ethicist may open up for the near future. But is it true that in the last couple of years we've seen this phenomenon that where AI is developed, like in Google, like Microsoft, we've seen a kind of dismantling of the groups of experts on AI ethics issues? Should we be worried about this fact, considering that today AI systems are mainly developed by big corporations like this?
Yes, I'm quite worried about it because a lot of companies have been sort of downsizing their ethics employees, or the oversight boards that advise them on ethics. And I think it's, it's a side effect of the fact that these companies are racing to try and be the first to make these systems commercial, to make them, actually make money for the company. And the ethicists are slowing that down. They're saying, wait, these systems are not trustworthy. They're biased. They have all these problems. And the companies are saying, well, but wait a minute, if we slow down to address that, then this other company is going to get ahead of us. So obviously we can't leave that to corporations, because corporations don't have the interest of the public as their first priority. So that gets back to who gets to make these decisions. And I think, we have to have some kind of structures at the level of government that are able to come up with laws that make sense. But that also is going to require our legislators to have some literacy about how these systems work. That's a big ask. And I think we're somewhat, unfortunately, far from that. But hopefully, people are becoming much more aware of the need for that. And as I think, the audience we have here, the generation of people now coming up through high school and university, are going to be more literate about how technology works and sort of what are the ethical considerations. And hopefully, things won't become too disastrous before they get into power.
Right. And I think if you guys, students, listen and watching to us, read the book of Melanie, will be really more literate about all these issues that we have discussed this evening. So thank you so much, Melanie Mitchell, for being with us. Thank you, Roberto Trotta, for hosting this conversation. It was a pleasure for me and a privilege for me to be with you this evening. Thank you to all the students who have written and put questions to you both. And I can only say see you soon for the next presentation of this Premio Cosmos. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Marco.
Thank you, Melanie. Ciao, Roberto.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you all. Pleasure being here. Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye, Melanie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Prego,
it was a
Chiara.
very, very interesting conversation. And thanks to the students and to the teacher for a lot of interactions. We are very happy for that. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.